My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 36, I live in Seattle, and this is a story about the kind of love that can lift you or level you. Family love, the most stubborn kind there is. Before we begin, let me say this. If you've ever felt a little invisible at your own table, you're in the right place. We tell those stories here, the quiet hurts and the small mercies, and we find our way through them together. If that speaks to you, I'd be grateful if you'd stay, subscribe, and keep me company for what comes next. Not invited to family dinner until I bought the whole place. That's the title. It sounds like a punchline. It isn't. It starts on a damp Thursday in November, the kind Seattle is famous for, the kind that turns the city into a watercolor. My umbrella had flipped twice in the wind and given up the ghost. I set it down by the door, toweled my hair with a kitchen towel, and did what we all do when the day hasn't been kind. I scrolled. There it was in the bright, curated light of someone else's happiness, a photo from my mother's Facebook. My parents and my older brother, Evan, his wife, 2 cousins I hadn't seen since college. A long table at Harrington's, the white tablecloth kind of place, slices of prime rib on heavy plates, wine winking in crystal. My father's arm was slung around Evan's shoulders, my mother's lipstick perfect, her caption efficient and bright. Family dinner, so much joy in one room. Family, so much joy. I read it twice before the meaning settled in. No one had called, no text. No, can you make 7? Not a whisper, not a breadcrumb. Just a room I was supposed to call mine and a chair I wasn't offered. People think rejection is loud. The truth is, the worst kind is quiet. It moves in like fog, no scene, no shattering glass. You only notice the chill when it's in your bones. I poured cereal into a chipped bowl and listened to the rain on the window. Somewhere across the city, the clink of silverware. Somewhere, my family telling the old stories. The one about Evan's first little league home run. My mother's favorite, where my father talked his way into a sold-out Springsteen show. The one where I, if I appeared at all, was the punchline, the sweet child who colored outside the lines and never learned to stop. I thumbed the photo larger and counted faces. 8 smiles, no space left on the bench. Maybe there had been a 9th seat at the end. Maybe not. Either way, I wasn't in the room to find out. There's a special kind of arithmetic we learn as kids. Who gets the big slice of cake? Whose stories make it to the table? Which praise is rationed and which comes by the ladle? We pretend we outgrow it, but it follows us. It followed me to a wet, gray kitchen with a bowl of breakfast for dinner and a knot in my throat that wouldn't budge. An old memory visited, uninvited. 2nd grade art night, my construction paper collage of the Puget Sound taped crooked on the wall. My mother chatting with Evan's teacher about potential. My father checking the Mariners' score, telling Evan he could grow up to pitch like Randy Johnson if he stuck with it. I remember tugging my mother's sleeve. "Do you like it?" I asked, pointing at my paper C. She kissed my head. "You're a sweetheart," she said, and turned back. Sweet is what you call a child when you don't know what else to say. Back in my apartment, the cereal went soggy. My phone lay quiet, face down on the counter, as if even it were afraid to disturb the silence. I could have called. I could have typed, looks like fun, as if I were a neighbor and not a daughter. But there's a dignity line, and I have learned, too late maybe, to stop crossing it. You might ask, why Harrington's? Why that restaurant on that night? I could make it about the food, but it was never about the food. It was about a dress and ritual and a name polished by 100 anniversaries. It was about being seen. In my family, Harrington's was shorthand for we made it. It was where you brought news worthy of cloth napkins. I stood at the window and watched a bus hiss by, brake lights bleeding red in the slick street. Somewhere, a ferry moaned on the sound. Seattle is a chorus of small noises when it rains. I felt very small inside that chorus. Here is what I didn't do. I didn't cry. Maybe that would have been cleaner. Instead, I did the thing I've always done when the room won't make space for me. I took inventory. Of what hurt being erased, of what didn't. The rain, oddly enough, felt honest, of what I could carry forward and what I had to put down. The list was messy. So am I. I wish I could tell you this was an extraordinary betrayal, a once-in-a-lifetime wound. It wasn't. It was just the latest turn of an old wheel. But sometimes one turn lines up all the spokes, and you can finally see the shape of it. I set the bowl in the sink, rinsed away the milk ring, and clicked off the kitchen light. The apartment fell into a soft dark. The photo was still glowing on my phone. I let it go black and set the phone beside the dead umbrella by the door, two silent things that had failed me that night. If this were a different kind of story, I might have rushed to the restaurant and made a scene. I might have stood at the host stand and said, "Table for one," just to prove I could. But I have learned that the most important doors don't open because you push harder. They open because you build the key. This isn't the part where I buy Harringtons. That comes later. This is the part where I notice, finally, fully, that there's no place set for me, and I decide I will not ask for one again. Out in the hallway, someone's dog barked twice and settled. I breathed with it, in and out, steadying. There is a moment just before you change, when the air feels thinner and time holds still, as if the world is waiting to see which way you'll turn. I turned toward myself. I didn't arrive at that November night by accident. There is a road that leads to it, paved in small moments no one remembers but you. When I was 8, my brother Evan got a trophy taller than his shin for a swim meet. My mother cleared a spot for it on the living room shelf, between our family Bible and a bowl of sea glass we'd collected on Alki Beach. "Center," she said, tapping the wood where she wanted my father to place it. I brought home a spelling bee ribbon the same week, blue, not even the lesser red, and set it on the coffee table while everyone admired Evan's name in gold. By dinner, my ribbon had slipped under a stack of catalogs. No one put it on a shelf. I found it 2 weeks later, bent at the corner when I was looking for the remote. That's how it begins, not with cruelty but with arrangement. What goes on the shelf, what gets tucked away, what we celebrate, what we merely acknowledge with a distracted smile. I was a soft child. Teachers wrote kind in the margins of my report cards. At church, old women squeezed my hand and said I had an old soul, which is another way of saying a quiet one. Evan ran hot, fast-talking, fast-moving, the kind of boy who left wake. My parents were not unloving. They were simply tired in the way American parents get. Commutes that chewed daylight, bills stacked like playing cards, a marriage that needed tending and got triage instead. In that fatigue, they chose the easy measures. You could see Evan's wins. You could frame and hang them. Mine required you to sit a while. In high school, I wrote an essay about my grandmother's hands, how they smelled faintly of lemons and wool, how she folded dumplings like tiny envelopes and sealed wishes inside. My English teacher cried when she handed it back. "This is a voice," she said, and I carried that word around for a month like a warm stone in my pocket. At home, when I tried to read it after dinner, my father glanced at the microwave clock and said we should save it for Sunday, when there was more time. Sunday came and went. More time never did. People think favoritism is a sin of passion. Often it's a habit. Evan was a straight line my parents could trace. Boyhood winners into scholarship, into law school, into a job with a view. I was all ellipses, a sentence that didn't announce where it was going. When I left a business program after 2 years, suffocated by classes that felt like blueprints for someone else's life, my mother shook her head and said to a neighbor, not unkindly, "Rachel's sweet, but she drifts." That word lodged in me like a splinter. You learn not to touch it, but you always know it's there. The year my parents almost split, 2008, when the economy fell through its own floor, my father lost a friend to layoffs and kept his job by taking a demotion. He stopped whistling in the mornings. My mother started saving every receipt and folding them into a rubber-banded brick in the junk drawer. Love became math. Love asked, "What returns?" Evan's path offered answers. Mine offered questions. When the world gets shaky, questions feel like a luxury. So I got good at being easy. I became the child who didn't make more work. I loaded the dishwasher without being asked, smoothed the couch cushions, kept my room museum neat. If they praised me, it was for my steadiness, the way a person praises a good lamp. Useful, reliable, silent. Some nights I would sit at the foot of the stairs and listen to them talk in the kitchen, the low murmur of strategy, college funds, braces, the leak by the water heater. When my name came up, it was logistics. "She'll be fine," my mother would say, with the confidence of someone who has never been fine by accident. "She's sweet," as if sweetness were buoyant enough to keep you from going under. I don't tell you this to make villains of my parents. They are people shaped by their own stairs and kitchens. My mother was the middle of 5, raised to keep the peace, to fill the pitcher before anyone asked. My father wanted so badly to be a person who provided that he forgot provision isn't only money. We are all handed scripts. Most of us never think to edit. When I moved into my first apartment, a studio with a view of a brick wall and a sliver of sky, my mother brought a plant. "You won't feel lonely if something is growing," she said, and kissed my cheek. I watered it weakly and watched it bend toward the light. That's what we do, too. We bend toward whatever light we're given. I took night classes because the days belonged to rent. The glow of a computer screen became the only witness to the hours I traded for learning. A language of logic I had never been offered in school, loops and conditions and small, elegant solutions that felt like fitting the right key into the right lock. No one clapped. No one needed to. There's a sacredness in being witnessed, yes, but there is also a strange holiness in doing the work with no applause to anchor you. On holidays, I returned to the old house and joined the choreography. My mother's gravy, my father's playlist, Evan's stories that hit their marks. When I tried to share what I was building, software for small bookstores, a way to make their days less frantic, my father nodded the polite nod he gives waiters refilling water. "That's nice," he said, like a period at the end of a short sentence. Evan asked if there was real money in helping mom and pop shops. He didn't ask to be cruel. He asked from the high ground of a person who has only ever seen money arrive on schedule. If you want to know why the photo hurt, this is why. It wasn't a single slight. It was the final bead on a string I'd been wearing since childhood, light enough to carry, heavy enough to tilt my posture. The dinner at Harrington's was not an event. It was an emblem. It said we celebrate what we can explain. It said we have room for the familiar versions of you. On the night I turned toward myself, I took the plant my mother had given me and moved it closer to the window. The leaves were pale on one side, reaching toward a light too far away. I rotated the pot a quarter turn. It was a small thing. Most changes are. But there is a dignity in adjusting what you can. Angle, access, expectation. When the world won't do it for you, I lay in bed and let the old film reel run. The trophy on the shelf, the ribbon under catalogs, the essay no one heard, the word drifts pressed like a thumbprint on my forehead. Somewhere in the city, my family finished dessert and asked for the check. I imagined the clink of cups, the sugar packets torn open, the way my mother would tuck one into her purse for later. I have learned to love them for their human smallness, and to love myself enough not to be erased by it. People talk about finding your voice as if it's lost in the woods and all you need is a flashlight. Mine was never lost. It was quieter than the room allowed. The work ahead wasn't discovery, it was amplification, not a shout, a steadying. Before sleep found me, I wrote one sentence on the back of an envelope with a dull pencil. Build something that doesn't ask for a seat. Then I slid the envelope under my laptop like a promise and turned out the light. I didn't announce the change. I rarely do. I let it grow the way a fern grows, quietly, frond by frond, until one day the room looks greener and you can't remember when it happened. In the morning, I made coffee in a chipped mug and opened my laptop to the sentence I'd written the night before. Build something that doesn't ask for a seat. It didn't tell me what to do. It told me where to stand. I started by listing the things that had always comforted me when rooms felt cold. Bookstores, the particular hush of aisles lined with paper, the bell over the door, the hand-lettered staff picks signs that felt like love notes from strangers. If I could make life easier for those places, if I could be useful there, maybe that would be enough. Maybe enough didn't require a chair at someone else's table. I had been tinkering for months. A simple inventory and online order system for independent shops that never had time for complicated software. The code worked in pieces the way an old radio catches stations if you turn the dial just right. But nothing is real until it helps a person with a real problem, and I didn't have a person yet. I printed a one-page flyer at the public library because my home printer ate paper like a nervous animal. I cut the edges straight with a librarian's borrowed paper trimmer and slid the sheets into my backpack beside a notebook and a cheap pen that left blots. The rain had taken a holiday that afternoon. Seattle wore a pale winter sun like an apology. I walked to Mercer Street Books, the little shop 2 neighborhoods over where the owner, a woman with gray streaks and kind eyes, had once recommended a novel that got me through a bad month. Her name was Lydia. She remembered my face, not my name, which felt fair. "Back again," she said, and the bell over the door answered for me. I told her I had an idea that might help, then waited for her to glance at the clock and invent a reason to cut me short. Instead, she set my flyer on the counter and listened. Really listened, the way the best booksellers do, as if you are a story that might be worth the time. "We use an old spreadsheet and a prayer," she said when I finished. "Half my day is hunting for titles that turn out to be in a misnamed tab. I asked if I could come by after close one night and watch the mess up close." She smiled at the word mess. "Bless you," she said. "Most people promise to solve things they've never seen." That night I stayed until the lights went dim and her last customer wandered out with a novel and a candle. We sat on the floor with a laptop between us, surrounded by shoeboxes of paper receipts and a cat that made a bed on my backpack. I watched how Lydia searched for a book that had been reordered 6 times and still slipped through cracks. I timed how long it took to process 5 online orders when the internet hiccuped and the label printer jammed. I wrote down the stupid stuff, the button that should be on the left, the way the confirmation email needed to say thank you, come back soon instead of order processed, the color of the loading spinner that made Lydia squint. People think innovation is a grand reveal. Often it's empathy with a keyboard. When I got home, I rewired the whole thing. I moved buttons to where her hands had already learned to reach. I made the error messages kind. I let the inventory page forgive a typo because life is too short to lose a book over a missing letter. I wasn't building a platform. I was building a handrail. Within a week, Lydia was using a test version. It wasn't pretty, but it was gentle. She sent me emails that read like field notes. Found the night watchman even though I typed watchman. Bless you. A label printed on the first try. Customer wrote back to say the email sounded like a person. I screenshotted those lines and kept them in a folder called proof for the days when the old words, drifts, nice, drifted back and tried to take up space. I didn't tell my family. Not out of spite, out of stewardship. You don't put a seedling into a storm to prove it's alive. You wait until it's taken root. Lydia knew a bookseller in Tacoma, Javi, who ran a shop out of a converted garage behind a coffee roastery. He liked to say the store smelled like plot twists and dark roast. He called one afternoon while I was on a city bus, my phone pressed to the window to catch a stubborn signal. "Lyd says you're the wizard who made her labels stop crying," he said. "If you can make mine behave, I'll name a shelf after you." I laughed, then got off one stop early and walked the rest of the way home, already rewriting my to-do list in my head. Javi's inventory lived in a tangle of handwritten cards and an app that hadn't been updated since Obama's first term. He tested my software by trying to break it, which is what good people do when they want what you make to survive the world. He found a dozen ways to crash it. I fixed 13. Some nights the coding went long and I fell asleep with half the keyboard imprinted on my cheek. I learned to keep crackers by the desk and a blanket over the chair back because the radiator in my apartment had its own moods. Rejection emails still came. Investors who wanted scale before soul. Advisors who said bookstores are quaint, as if quaint were a disease. I kept a spreadsheet of no and another of YES, and I fed the second one names when I could. Lydia, Javi, a shop called Harbor Light Books in Anna Courts that had a leaky roof and a loyal Thursday knitting circle. The YES column grew slowly, like a savings account you don't touch. On Sundays, I visited my parents. The rituals were reliable. The roast, the talk radio murmuring from the kitchen, Evan's monologue about a case he couldn't really discuss but did anyway. When my mother asked, "How's work?" I said, "It's moving," which was true, and she nodded as if I'd said fine, which was also true in a way. Evan teased me about being mysterious. "You know investors hate mystery," he said, and I thought so do families, but I didn't say it. Here's the thing about being misunderstood. It can shrink you, yes, but it can also give you room to grow in directions no one is watching. The part of me that had spent years asking to be seen learned another trick: how to see. To notice the choke points in a day, the tiny frictions that tire a person out. To ask a shopkeeper what would make Tuesday feel lighter and then write code that did that for them. I had always been told I was sweet. Sweetness, it turns out, can be engineered into systems. It can live in where a button sits and what a message says when a task fails. It can be the difference between a person feeling stupid and a person feeling human. By spring, Lydia's back room was less of a storm. She sent me a photo one afternoon, a stack of shipping boxes neatly labeled, the cat asleep in the space cleared by efficiency. "Look," she wrote, "room to exhale." That word room worked on me. It reminded me of the photo from Harrington's, the table packed to its edges, the sense that there was no place left for me. You can spend a lifetime begging to be squeezed in, or you can start building places with room. I chose the latter, not out of defiance, out of design. I didn't tell Harrington's any of this. I didn't tell anyone who ate there that I was learning, line by line, how to build something that made room as its first principle. But late at night, when the city went quiet and the plant on my windowsill tilted another degree toward the moon, I would close the laptop and imagine a table where no one had to prove their worth to sit down. That's what I was making, even if it didn't look like it yet. Not just software for bookstores, but a way of measuring value that didn't require permission. And while my family stayed busy counting seats, I was learning how to make more of them. Lydia invited me to a Thursday author night, local poets, a guitar, a dozen folding chairs set up between staff picks and cookbooks. "Come by if you can," she said, and added, "We'll use your system for all the orders tonight. Trial by poetry." I went early to help set out tea bags and a plate of lemon cookies that tasted like they'd been taught kindness. We printed name tags without the usual cursing at the label printer. Orders queued and cleared. People stayed after to talk about a line they loved, the way a certain stanza sounded like being forgiven. When the last stack of paperbacks was signed, with gratitude, I packed the laptop and felt that peculiar lightness that comes when a thing you built holds under the weight of strangers' hope. It was late when I left. Seattle wore a thin fog, the kind that makes traffic lights look like watercolor dots. I took the long way home, past the water and up a hill I used to walk as a teenager when I needed the kind of thinking that requires lungs. The city was humming, dishwashers in restaurants, a bus exhaling, someone laughing too loud on a corner. That's when I saw it. Harrington's, all brass and glass and white linen, glowing as if someone had lit it from the inside. Through the window, a familiar geometry. My mother's profile, neat as a bookend. My father with his hand on Evan's shoulder. Evan's wife tucking hair behind her ear the way she does when she's about to say something she wants everyone to hear. A cousin, 2 seats down, raising a glass. The arrangement had changed over the years, partners added, elders gone, but the picture was the same picture. It itched at something old in me, the body memory of standing on the outside of warmth. I stopped on the sidewalk, a person-shaped pause in the flow of the night. The host glanced my way and looked past me, trained to gather and seat the people who announced themselves. I didn't move. A delivery driver unloaded boxes at the curb. The tape gun sang its clean, ripping song. Inside, my mother laughed at something Evan said, her hand landing lightly on his wrist, the way she did when he was 11 and announced he'd build a go-kart out of scrap wood and belief. I remembered the go-kart, how it rattled once around the cul-de-sac and died happy. That's what we celebrated, motion that made noise. A server leaned in to pour wine. The bottle caught the light and flared. My father's mouth formed to us, the family toast that promised everything and often meant nothing. I could hear it without hearing it. I knew where the story would go, where the night would land, where the check would fall. There was a version of me that would have found this moment unbearable. She would have pressed a palm to the glass as if the right pressure could smudge the distance, as if her breath could write a message on it. She would have felt small enough to fit between forked tines. I watched, and something steadier rose. Not anger. Anger is hot and burns out. This was cooler, a clarity that comes when you have stared at a thing long enough to finally see its edges. It struck me then how much of my life had been arranged around tables I didn't set. School tables where teams were chosen. Conference tables where titles arranged the chairs. Kitchen tables where the day's worth was tallied in visible ways. I had been trained to think the honor was proximity. That being near meant being known. A car door slammed behind me. A couple hurried past, perfume and cologne trailing them like parentheses. The hostess greeted them with the small half-bow that belongs to expensive places. For a moment, I saw all of it at once. The choreography inside, the choreography of the street, my own stillness. You don't always get to choose the rooms that made you, but you can decide which ones you build next. I thought of Lydia's cat asleep in the space we'd cleared by making work easier. I thought of Javi's joke shelf, Rachel's miracle, where he displayed the books the system had found after months of being lost. I thought of the email from Harbor Lightbooks that said, "We're breathing better," and attached a photo of 3 older women knitting, the counter finally clean enough to hold their tea. Breathing better, room to exhale, all my small fixes adding up to oxygen. In the window's reflection, I caught my own face, a little tired, eyes rimmed with the day's longness but not erased. Reflections are honest in a way photographs rarely are. They show you where you're standing. I took 1 step closer to the glass, not toward them but toward myself. The white napkins, the gleam, the choreographed cheer, none of it had ever been for me. That's not tragedy, that's architecture. You stop trying to move load-bearing walls and you design around them. And then, clear as if someone had leaned in to whisper, a sentence arrived. Don't ask for a seat. Own the table. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a plan. Not this table, not tonight, but a table like this. A place people dressed a little better for, where jokes landed and toasts rose and no one had to make a case for belonging. A place that told a different story with the way it arranged its chairs. I checked my phone, not for messages, there were none, but for notes. I wrote in the same file where I kept Lydia's field reports, if I ever build a room, start with who needs room. I added 2 practical lines, learn licenses, find mentors outside tech. Even the grandest vows need a to-do list. Inside, a server set down dessert plates. My mother clapped her hands once, soft. Evan made a face at a torch-kissed creme brulee, pretending to burn his tongue the way he had as a kid. The past is a loop if you let it be. I put my hands in my coat pockets and stepped back from the glass. The night took me in. A bus arrived with a sigh and I caught it without running, the small mercy of a driver who waited an extra beat. I sat by the window and watched Harrington slide by, reduced to a moving painting, then to light, then to nothing. On the ride home, I sketched in my head the bones of a business plan, names of people I should call, the rough math of what it would take to turn a platform into a company, and a company into leverage and leverage into choice. The kind of choice that could turn a lifelong metaphor into a door you could open with a key you made yourself. Back in my apartment, I fed the plant and turned it again toward the light. Then I opened my laptop and began a new document, the title simple and a little audacious. Tables, not the kind you buy, the kind you build. The plan didn't arrive with trumpets, it arrived with spreadsheets. I started with what I could count. Hours I could work before my eyes went sandpaper dry. Dollars left after rent and rice and bus fare. Shops within a bus ride that might listen for 5 minutes if I promised to be useful in 3. I filed the paperwork to turn a project into a company and laughed out loud at the word incorporated, as if I were a building. Maybe I was. Maybe that's all a business is. Beams and joists strong enough to hold other people's hope. I made a budget that looked like a dare. The biggest line item was time. I divided my days into quarters, code, calls, fixes, food, and cheated only when a shop owner texted past closing with a glitch that turned out to be a comma in the wrong place. It is humbling the way a single character can break a system. It is also instructive. People break for small reasons, too. The fix is often kindness, placed exactly. The first investor I met wore a watch that could have paid a month of everyone's rent on my block. He skimmed my deck, stopped at the slide with my market size, and said, "You're building a canoe when the world funds yachts." I told him canoes get you through places yachts can't. He smiled the way a person smiles at a child who has dressed herself and chosen every color she loves, and said, "Pass." I wrote his name under no and added a row for his argument, small market, low margin, and a column called what he's right about. If you listen carefully, rejection leaves you a trail. The second investor was kinder and worse. "I love your heart," she said, "and I worry about your head." I thanked her and went home and wrote a feature that allowed a bookseller to send a handwritten thank you with a click. The thank you wasn't real ink, but it looked like it. Lydia used it and said a customer cried because no one had said her name that tenderly in months. Head and heart are not enemies. They make better rooms when they share the lease. By summer, I had 12 paying stores, then 15. I moved the proof folder to a new hard drive because the screenshots of grateful emails had outgrown the old one. I printed one and taped it above my desk. "We sold out of a title because you're only 3 left" banner made me hustle. "How did you know to do that?" "Because scarcity is real and motivation is human," I wrote back. "And also because bookstores are churches we've agreed to call by another name." I learned to price without apologizing. The first invoices I sent were timid, as if money were a stranger I didn't want to disturb. Javi called me out. "Charge like you plan to still be here next year," he said. Otherwise, you won't be. I raised my rates and added a line, sliding scale for shops under 600 square feet. Fairness doesn't mean sameness. The small deserve to keep breathing. My librarian's flyer gave way to a one-page site I built at 2 a.m. and rewrote at 3. I named the company North Star, not because I thought I could guide anyone, but because I wanted to remind myself that the point is direction, not speed. A friend of a friend, May, agreed to help 2 days a week in exchange for equity and the promise that we would keep the product human. "If you hire me," she said, "I will argue for the user every single morning." We shook on it over dumplings that leaked soup down our wrists. She spent her first week deleting adjectives from onboarding copy and replacing them with instructions. She built a dashboard that showed Lydia how many minutes she'd saved and lit up like a parade when a task took less time than last week. "Validation for grown-ups," May said. "We all need a gold star sometimes." On Tuesdays, I took the bus to a co-working space that smelled like ambition and microwaved leftovers. Startups around me spoke a language that dared the sky: hockey stick growth, land and expand, burn rate, CAC. I learned the terms and took what I could use. When someone pitched a social app to optimize brunch photos, I adjusted my headphones and wrote a query that could find a misshelved book by the memory of a cover color. We all build for what we believe should last. A mentor arrived by accident. I was waiting for a latte when an older man in a mariner's cap glanced at my screen and said, "Inventory, huh?" He introduced himself as Tom, retired after 4 decades running a regional supply chain for a grocery chain. He had calloused hands and the gentlest way of pointing at a problem I've ever seen. "Your system is clean," he said, "but you're not tracking bottlenecks. Know where the line gets choked. Fix it there first." He showed me how to map a day like a highway and circle the sections where traffic always slowed. "Solve those, and people will forgive you for the rest," he said, and bought my coffee like he'd been waiting for a reason to buy a stranger coffee all week. I added a feature that measured choke points, where orders waited too long, where returns piled, where new staff always stumbled. We surfaced the friction with a small, merciful bell icon and a sentence that began, "Here's a way to make this easier today." Lydia emailed, "You read my mind." Tom texted a thumbs-up emoji and later a photo of a salmon he'd caught, as if to say, "Keep your line steady, the fish will come." Not everything sang. A storm knocked out a server and I spent a night on the floor with my laptop back against the couch, whispering bargains to the dark. If it comes back before morning, I don't remember what I promised. I only remember the screen blinking to life at 4:12 a.m. and May's message, "Up, on it." Arriving before the coffee finished, we moved to a more expensive host the next week and cut elsewhere to pay for it. Security is not a luxury when people trust you with their days. By fall, 28 shops trusted us. Then 35. I signed our first lease for a tiny office above a florist. The hallway always smelled like weddings and apologies. We moved in 2 mismatched desks and a corkboard for index cards that read like prayers. Make returns kinder. Auto-suggest ISBNs from partials. Let people fix a mistake without feeling stupid. May printed 1 card in larger type and pinned it at the top, "Room to exhale." Every decision had to point there or it didn't belong. My parents noticed I was busy and interpreted it as distraction. "We miss you at Sunday dinner," my mother said on the phone one night, the clink of dishes in the background. I told her I was building something and she said, "Don't let it make you hard." She meant well. I watched my reflection in the dark window and told her I wouldn't. I didn't tell her that I was building the opposite of hardness. I was building softness that could scale. Evan texted me a link to an article about a bookstore chain filing for bankruptcy and typed, "Tough market." I responded with a photo of Lydia's author night, a circle of chairs filled by people who had shown up not for a discount, but for a poem. "Different market," I wrote. He hearted the photo and added nothing else. Sometimes that's all a person can do from the map they are using. A city grant for small business digital tools opened, and I filled out the application at my kitchen table with the seriousness of a person taking an oath. We won enough to hire a second developer, Omar, who wrote code like jazz, disciplined improvisation that found the melody in someone else's mess. He built a reconciliation tool that could compare a shop's paper habit to our clean rows and help them trust the numbers without shame. Shame is a terrible operating system. We replaced it with curiosity. The day North Star crossed 50 clients, Lydia sent a plant for the office. For windows, her card read, "And whatever light you find there." May put it on the sill and rotated the pot slightly, the way I do at home. Omar taped a paper star to the pot and wrote north on it, an arrow pointing up. We laughed too hard for so small a joke. You cling to small joys when you don't yet know how to celebrate the big ones. That night, while the city glittered like a field of coins, I opened a sheet labeled tables and added numbers next to the dreams. What would it take to turn this canoe into something that could pull a bigger boat? Not a yacht. A ferry. A thing that carries people. I wrote down revenue targets and runways and the names of potential partners who believed the point of commerce was community. I added a line I wasn't ready to say aloud. Acquire a place that tells a story back to the ones who erased you. The audacity of it made me close the file. Then I opened it again and left the sentence where it was. Plans need oxygen, too. I slept and dreamed of aisles and bells and hands passing books like messages in a bottle. In the morning, I woke to an email from a shop in Boise that had heard about us from a cousin of Javi's. "We're small," it read, "but we matter out here." I wrote back, "That's our specialty. Growth looks glamorous from the outside. From the inside, it felt like laying track while the train is already moving, checking each spike twice because you know who's on board." On Fridays, we ordered cheap takeout and took turns naming the week's smallest victory. A bug that finally died, a customer who smiled through the phone, a line of code that read like a poem. On Sundays, I watered the office plant and then my own and tried to be the kind of person who wouldn't forget to turn either toward the light. There is a point in building when the ground under you firms, not because you're safe, but because you've stood there long enough to make a path. I reached that point in late October, the rain back for its residency, when a subject line landed with the gravity of a bell. Harrington's inquiry. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee, felt the mug warm my hands, and stood by the window watching the clouds argue with each other. Then I sat, breathed once, and clicked. I clicked and found a polite paragraph written in the careful tone of people who live in the land between pride and need. "MS. Morgan," it began. "We were referred by a small business owner you've helped. Harrington's is exploring ways to modernize reservations, gift cards, and private event bookings. Would you be open to a brief conversation?" No one had ever written my name and Harrington's in the same sentence. I called Tom first. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Go. Don't sell them anything yet. Learn the room. You can't rearrange tables you haven't sat at." May, hearing Harrington's, spun around in her chair and mouthed, "Go," like a coach before a free throw. The next afternoon, I walked through the brass-trimmed doors I had spent a lifetime orbiting. The host stand, the heavy carpet, the faint chorus of flatware, everything felt like a museum that still served dinner. A woman in her 60s approached with the posture of someone who had apologized for nothing in years. "I'm Alina Whitaker," she said. "We've owned Harrington's for 3 decades." She led me along the back hall, past framed black-and-white photographs of couples and retirements and a mayor biting into a ribbon. "We're not in trouble," she said, which is what people say when the water has reached the lip of the boat. at an inflection point. The world does not stand still, and we have stood still beautifully for a very long time. In her office, a small room with a window onto the alley and a desk that had known 1,000 reservations, we talked systems. Gift cards lost between drawers, a private dining calendar that lived in a leather book, a website built when people still said www out loud. I asked my questions in the language I trust. Where does the day choke? What breaks when you're tired? Who apologizes for the same thing twice a week? Eleanor's answers were crisp, unsentimental. When I sketched how our tools might fit without bulldozing what worked, she nodded exactly once. Modernize, not sterilize, she said. Harrington's is a memory factory. I will not trade linen for speed. We don't do speed for its own sake, I said. We do oxygen. The first pilot was gift cards. May designed a flow that looked like Harrington's elegant serifed and said a gift for you in a voice that didn't try too hard. Omar connected the old POS to a new spine that could, with patience, carry data without dropping it. We printed test cards on heavy stock and sent one to my mother, not as a signal, but as a test of the mail, and watched the tracking number like new parents. Next came private events. I built a page that let people choose a date without having to describe their grandmother's birthday to 3 different humans. We wrote copy the way a host speaks to the person who did all the planning. We see your work. Let us carry the rest. The inquiries doubled in a week. Of course they did, Eleanor said, not triumphantly but like a meteorologist reporting weather. I was in that office when the other sentence finally surfaced, the one she had not yet said. We had finished reviewing the week's reservations when she closed the leather book and folded her hands. I'm retiring, she said. The word landed gently and still carried weight. End of the year, she added. This place needs a steward, not just a buyer. I've been interviewing both. I felt it then, the old loop loosening, the shape of a future bending toward me. But feeling is not a plan. I asked for numbers, revenue bands, payroll, the rent that had slept for years and would wake the moment the lease renewed. Eleanor slid a folder across the desk. We are not cheap, she said. We are also not only numbers. I took the folder to Tom's diner and spread it between us like a map. He circled line items with his coffee spoon. Labor will climb, he said. Suppliers will want to renegotiate. Margins are thinner than nostalgia admits. He lifted his eyes. But the brand is a river. You don't buy that, you inherit it. Can I do this? I asked. He shrugged in that kind way he has. The better question is, should you? If you want revenge, no. If you want a room that tells a different story, maybe. At the office, May wrote why on the whiteboard and underlined it 3 times. We made 2 columns, ego and design. Under ego, prove something, show up in places that erased you. Under design, build a table that seats more people, marry hospitality to literacy, use North Star to make the back of house breathe so the front can love better. We erased the first column. We kept the second. I met with a banker at a credit union that smells like old carpet and trust. She wore a cardigan with a snag near the cuff and asked questions about cash flow I was glad I had answers to. We do SBA lending, she said, but we also do community lending. Do you intend to keep this a place for the city? I told her about author nights and partnerships with the library and a fund named after a waitress who'd retired after 30 years that would cover anniversary dinners for couples who couldn't afford linen but deserved it. She smiled, small and real. Bring me your plan, she said. Bring me your people. I built a deck labeled stewardship and made it look like Harrington's feels. No rockets, no hockey sticks. We projected steady revenue with honest dips. We outlined upgrades that wouldn't show at the table and thus mattered most. Dishwashers that didn't break at 7 p.m. A ventilation system the staff wouldn't have to apologize for, software that let the kitchen see patterns and the servers see grace. I added a slide for North Star integration, not to boast, but to prove we could carry the weight. May put in a slide with a single sentence. Rooms that last are built around breath, not noise. Javi drove up from Tacoma on a Tuesday to sit with me in the florist-scented hallway and practice the pitch. "Say the part about rooms," he said. Twice. Lydia sent a note I folded into my wallet. "Buy it because you love tables, not because you hate doors." Elinor asked to meet my team. She sat with May and Omar and Tom in a booth near the bar, ordered tea, and watched us watch the room. "Do you see the choke point?" she asked halfway through. May pointed at the pass where plates gathered in a nervous queue. Omar pointed at the corner where two servers crossed paths twice a minute and shuffled past each other like shy dancers. Tom pointed at the host stand. "No one is looking up at 6:45, he said. "They're looking down at the book. Put a person there whose only job is eyes." Elinor smiled the way a teacher smiles when the class has learned to read aloud. "Stewards," she said softly. The terms were not easy. They shouldn't be. I put down more than was comfortable, and the bank put up what they could justify, and Elinor held a note because she cared more about continuity than the last dollar. We negotiated a clause that preserved the staff, with training and raises mapped over 12 months, because rooms are their people first. I added a sentence that gave the pastry chef full license to try a new dessert each month if she trained a junior to replace the old favorite without anyone crying. At night, alone at my kitchen table, I ran the numbers until they stopped blinking. There is a point where a spreadsheet becomes an act of faith. I wrote YES in the cell that asked, "Are you the person to carry this?" Then I sat with the weight of it, the way you sit with a newborn, terrified, in awe, saying hello to a responsibility that will rearrange your days. I did not tell my family. Not yet. Not because I wanted a reveal, but because I wanted to build the thing before inviting the people who had once measured me by rooms I didn't own. Secrets can rot a house. This wasn't a secret. It was a foundation that needed to cure before it could bear the load. We set a closing date that felt like a held breath, December 28. "Between holidays," Elinor said, "the city will be quiet. The staff can come back to a new year and a known place." I signed my name alongside hers and watched the ink dry. On the way home, the bus windows fogged with the heat of strangers' lives. A child drew a smiley face on the glass and wiped it away with his sleeve. I texted Tom, "We're on." He replied with a fishing emoji and then, "Proud of you." May sent fireworks. Omar sent a gif of a ferry cutting across gray water. I unlocked my apartment, set my bag down beside the umbrella that had long since been replaced, and turned the plant toward the winter sun. Then I opened the table's document and changed one line. "Acquire a place that tells a story back to the ones who erased you became. Acquire a place that tells a true story to anyone who walks in. You belong." I saved the file and let the quiet settle. Somewhere in the city, Harrington's finished seating the early crowd. Somewhere, a server lifted 2 plates as if they were promises. I stood at my own little counter and rested my hands on the cool laminate and said out loud, to no one and to everyone, "Let there be room." December moved like a hand over still water, slow, deliberate, leaving ripples you only notice if you're watching. We met the staff in small circles before the paperwork was inked, not to promise a revolution, but to offer a handrail. Elinor gathered them in the private dining room on a Monday afternoon when the chandeliers were dark and the carpet smelled faintly of lemon oil and old laughter. "This is Rachel," she said, and stepped back as if introducing a pianist, not a new owner. I told them what I tell my own team, that I believe rooms are kept alive by the people who move through them, that my job is to make their jobs feel a little less like a breath held all night. They watched me the way people who work in restaurants watch everything, for tells, for respect, for the difference between performance and care. A server named Janine, 22 winters at Harrington's, crossed her arms without malice. "Everyone says they won't change the soup," she said, and there was a smile tucked in the corner of her mouth. "Then they changed the soup." "We won't change the soup," I said. "We might change the ladle you hate." The kitchen was a geography of heat and habit. Marco, the chef, had been there long enough to have a scar for every menu change and a story for each scar. He walked me through the line like a general taking inventory of a battle he wins 6 nights a week. "If you fix the pass," he said, tapping the narrow shelf where plates backed up like traffic at a tunnel, "you fix my blood pressure." I promised a wider landing and a second runner at peak. He nodded, a small truce. May set up in the office with a borrowed card table and a laptop color-coding flows like a cartographer. Omar lived under the host stand for 2 days, coaxing the old POS and our new spine into a marriage neither had asked for. Tom stood near the door at 6:45 one evening and didn't move for an hour, counting the beats between greetings and seating. "Eyes here," he said softly to a young host, not scolding, just pointing to the place where attention becomes grace. We made a list that looked like a prayer rug, things you change because people feel them in their bones. New dishwashers that didn't cough their last at 7 p.m., a prep table that didn't wobble when a knife demanded steadiness, a staff meal that arrived before the rush instead of after, hot and served at a table, not balanced on a milk crate in a hallway. At the end of the list, May wrote in ink, "Room to exhale." There were calls and signatures and numbers that clacked when they landed. The credit union wired what they promised. A leaner signed where it mattered, and I initialed paragraphs that will live in a drawer for the rest of my life. On the morning of December 28, the city wore that winter hush it saves for itself. Streets rinsed clean by rain, shop windows fogged with breath. I held a pen and wrote my name beside Alina's one last time. She closed the folder, placed the pen neatly on top, and stood. "Steward," she said, and shook my hand as if passing a baton that had been measured to fit one palm at a time. We didn't celebrate with speeches. We flipped chairs off tables, polished the flatware, and taped a printed sheet inside the kitchen door that said "Welcome" back in a font no designer would brag about. Marco put a pot of stock on because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do first. The place smelled like beginnings and onions. There was no sign on the door that said NEW ownership. We weren't a headline. We were continuity with slightly kinder edges. The first night, I stood near the host stand in the confident posture of someone pretending not to be terrified. Janine caught my eye and lifted her chin toward table 12, where a couple in their 70s held hands like teenagers. "Anniversary," she mouthed. I nodded to May, who typed a note that would follow them to dessert without anyone asking it to. At 6:43, the pass began to clog. At 6:45, the second runner moved into the new lane we'd made. At 6:50, Marco turned and looked at me through the heat shimmer and gave me the smallest of nods, the kind you store away for the nights that will not be so forgiving. The private dining calendar started breathing. People booked rooms without describing their parties 3 times to 3 different people. A gift card arrived in the mail with my mother's name on it. The test card, an experiment with perfect postage, and a tracking number that had become a talisman on my desk. I turned it over in my hands and imagined her doing the same. It said "a gift for you" in a serif that could have been from 1998 or tomorrow. I slid it back into its sleeve and filed it under proof with all the others. We added something small and quiet, a stack of postcards by the exit, blank on one side, the restaurant's return address on the other. "Tell someone you love tonight," the sign read. People wrote, "Best creme brulee of my life." He asked and I said yes. Dad stayed till the cake came out. He never stays. We mailed them the next morning and watched the smiles return a few days later, the way boomerangs know where to go if you fling them with enough intention. Not everything landed. A Friday storm took the power down on half the block, and we finished service by candlelight with a pared-down menu that felt like camping in good clothes. The printer at the bar died mid-rush, and Omar resurrected it with a screwdriver and a prayer to the gods of obsolete drivers. A server called in sick, and Janine rolled silver like a machine, then took an extra section and made it look like ballet. The staff learned the new software by muttering at it, and then, as the muscle memory formed, by thanking it under their breath when it prevented a double booking or found a lost reservation that had once lived only in someone's head. On the second week, we hosted a library fundraiser in the back room. Lydia brought a stack of paperbacks, and Javi arrived in a suit that looked borrowed from a cousin and wore it like a dare. Tom sat at the bar and told the bartender stories about the old Safeway warehouse and how moving pallets on time is its own love language. The room swelled around them. Book people, restaurant people, the kind of people who light up when service and story sit down at the same table. When the auctioneer raised her paddle and shouted about literacy, I felt something click into place that had nothing to do with money. At the end of the night, a leaner slipped in through the side door, not to inspect but to say goodbye in the only way that made sense to her. She walked the perimeter like a captain making one last round, patted the bar twice, and met me by the host stand. "You didn't change the soup," she said. "The ladle, though," I said, and we both laughed, quiet and relieved. When the doors locked and the staff clapped each other on backs and Marco yelled, "Family meal now," I lingered under the chandelier and looked up into its facets. Light doubled and tripled itself, then settled back into one shape. There is a humility in owning a place that existed before you and will exist after you if you do it right. Your name goes on papers no one will read. Your fingerprints go on habits everyone will feel. I began to think about invitations, not a spectacle. A table set with care, a night that said everything without having to say anything at all. To invite my family into this room was not to vindicate me. It was to let the room do what rooms can do when they're built around breath, teach without pointing, hold without gripping, show a different arithmetic of worth. I didn't call them yet. I watched the calendar. I watched the staff memorize the new rhythms. I watched the little stack of postcards shrink and replenish. I watched a nervous young server become less nervous, a busser find the beat of the floor, a hostess learn to look up at 6:45 and see not a crowd but a pattern she could gently rearrange. On a Tuesday between holidays, a woman in a red coat cried at table 6 when the dessert came with "Happy Birthday." Mama scrolled in chocolate. Her daughter had written the words on our postcard a week earlier. "I didn't think you'd really send it," the daughter said, laughing through her tears. We had, of course. Some promises are too small to break. That night, after the last chair was flipped and the dishwasher hummed its last, I locked the door and stood alone for a breath in the foyer where I had once hovered as a ghost. I could hear the soft after-sounds of a restaurant settling, metal cooling, ice shifting in the well, a distant clink like a glass remembering it had been held. I put my palm on the brass rail and felt its chill warm under my skin. There is a difference between owning and belonging. Owning is paperwork and risk. Belonging is the thing that happens when a room returns your breath steadier than you gave it. I belonged here, not because my name was on a deed, but because I had chosen again and again to build oxygen. I took my phone from my pocket and typed a message I had rewritten in my head for weeks. "Mom, Dad, Evan, are you free Sunday at 7? I'd love to have you for dinner. Harrington's, my treat." I hovered over send, then pressed my thumb to the glass. The message leapt into the world like a bird that has been pacing the windowsill rehearsing flight. I turned off the chandelier and let the room go dark, a good darkness, the kind that means rest is allowed. Outside, the city breathed, and for the first time in a long time, I matched its rhythm without effort. Sunday came with the kind of winter light that makes everything look honest. I spent the afternoon pretending to tidy things that were already tidy, then went to Harrington's early, not because anything needed me yet, but because I needed the room. Janine was polishing wine glasses with the stubborn patience of someone who trusts repetition. Marco had a pot going that smelled like memory. May checked the private dining calendar one last time and slid a hand over the host stand as if to calm it. Omar was under the bar again, not fixing anything, just listening for hums that shouldn't be there. "Family at 7, Janine said without looking up. It wasn't a question. "Family at 7, I said, and she handed me a clean napkin like a talisman. We didn't script the night. We set the stage the way we always do. The room just warm enough, the music at the level where sentences can land, the service stitched so neatly you can't see the seams. I asked Tom to take his usual stool at the bar around 6:15, eyes open. He nodded and said, "I'll count the beats," like a promise. At 6:58, my phone buzzed, here from my mother's number. I breathed once, twice, the way you do before walking into cold water, and met them at the door. They looked the way family always looks when it stands in a lobby together, somewhere between posed and unsure. My mother in a camel coat she loved, my father in his good jacket, Evan tugging at a cuff that had never quite fit his wrist. My mother kissed my cheek like we had not missed a dozen Sundays. "This is very nice," she said to the air, to the marble, to me. "Welcome," I said, the word fuller in my mouth than it had ever been. "I'm glad you're here." The hostess, new, nervous, well-coached, smiled and said, "Right this way," and I let her lead even though I could have drawn the floor plan from memory with both eyes closed. We passed the bar. Tom lifted his glass just so. We passed the postcards by the door. My mother paused without reading and then kept moving. Table 14 waited, set a little cleaner than usual, a small grace no one would notice. The menu said Harrington's in the type that had survived more seasons than any of us. Evan ran a thumb along the edge. "Classic," he said, a word that often means unchanged and sometimes means respected. I took my seat and felt the linen under my hands like an anchor. Janine arrived with water and that warm neutrality that makes a guest feel both important and like everyone who has ever sat here. "Welcome back," she said to my parents, and my mother lit like a porch when a familiar step hits the top stair. We ordered without ceremony. My father chose the prime rib because he always does. My mother asked about the salad with pears and walnuts and then said, "I'll have what I always have," because ritual is a kind of prayer. Evan asked if the creme brulee was still the best in the city, and Janine gave him a look that said, "It learned from the last best and kept going." There was talking. The weather. A neighbor who'd moved to Arizona and complained about sunshine. Evan's case, offered as a shape without the details that would make it real. My parents asked me about work, and I told them the truth in a way that didn't require translation. "It's busy," I said. "People are reading." My mother nodded as if I'd said, "Fine." The old choreography tried to assemble itself out of kindness as much as habit, and yet small differences threaded through. When my father asked for a different knife, "This one just doesn't feel right in my hand," Janine swapped it without sighing and said, "You aren't wrong. We're cycling those out. The weight's off." When my mother reached for her water and found it already refreshed, she said, "They see you here," and looked at me as if I were the one pouring. At 7:21, the pass threatened to clog and did not. The second runner moved like a comma placed properly, and Marco sent out plates that crossed the room the way a sentence does when it knows where it's going. Tom gave a small, satisfied shake of his head and turned back to his glass. The room breathed. My mother watched the couple at the corner table, hands folded around a story only the two of them knew, and said, "It's lovely they still look at each other like that." She meant more than she said. Nights like this strip words of their extras, leave them with the weight they can carry. The postcards by the exit worked their quiet magic. Janine set one by our bread plate, as she does for everyone. "Tell someone you love tonight," it read. My mother touched it with 2 fingers, the way she touches cloth she's thinking of buying. She turned it over and smiled at the return address. "That's new," she said, and something thoughtful crossed her face and stayed. The Mains arrived with the practiced chorus of heat and hello. My father cut into his prime rib and closed his eyes for a second, the universal sign of a person being forgiven by a bite. He lifted his fork and said, "They've kept the recipe." Janine was already at another table, I said. "They've kept the soul," and he nodded, absent-mindedly agreeing with a sentence that held more than he knew. At 7:46, a tiny emergency, a candle too close to a napkin, a whisper of scorch that could have become a story told badly later. Omar's hand appeared, calm and precise, moving the flame half an inch. No one at our table even noticed. I did, and filed it under the work no one sees where most of my pride lives now. Dessert threatened to be a confrontation, Evan lobbying for 2, my mother insisting on sharing. Janine solved it with an extra spoon and the kind of joke that makes everybody right. The creme brulee shell cracked like the first lake ice of a good winter. My mother tapped her spoon against the plate and said, "Still the best," a compliment that doubled as relief. It would have been easy to stand then, to clear my throat, to offer a speech nobody asked for, to say I own this room and wait for the chord to resolve. But the room was already doing what I hoped it would, teaching without pointing, holding without gripping. The point was not my victory. The point was their breath, even if they never learned why the air felt kinder. My phone buzzed face down on the table. May 2 words were green. I tucked the phone away like a secret I had no intention of keeping forever. When the check arrived, not on a silver tray, we retired those, on a leather folio that didn't squeak. My father reached for it by habit. I put my hand over his in a way I hadn't since I was small. "Let me," I said. He looked at me the way a man looks when his map doesn't match the road. There was no pride wounded in it, only surprise tempered by years of paying. "All right," he said slowly, and it was more permission than concession. I slid the folio back without a card. Janine nodded once and moved toward the host stand. My mother watched the exchange with the delicate suspicion of a person trying to solve a riddle politely. "Do you have a tab here?" she asked, light as frosting. In a manner of speaking, I said and smiled, not coy, not yet just grateful. We stood. Coats appeared as if conjured. The lobby gathered us and our echoes, tucking them into its corners. My mother paused by the postcards again and slipped one into her purse. "For your aunt," she said. "She would love this." "Take 2, I said, and she did. At the door, the night waited, damp and ordinary. My father cleared his throat. "This was good," he said, searching for a word bigger than the ones men keep ready. It felt like he let the sentence trail where we both could see it. "Like there was room," I said. "Yes," he said, grateful I had found the word for him. "Like that." We hugged in the polite choreography of people out of practice, and then with a little more of the old ease. Evan clapped my shoulder as if congratulating me for winning something he couldn't name. "You picked the right place," he said. "Harrington's never misses." As the door closed behind them, a gust of cold came in and then left, the way weather does with rooms that know how to hold their temperature. Janine caught my eye from the host stand. "We good?" she asked. "We're good," I said, and meant the night, the room, the plan that had been more prayer than spreadsheet until it wasn't. I watched my family walk down the steps. 3 figures in the half-light of a city that had made and unmade us in different ways. My mother turned once and looked back through the glass the way people do when they want to remember a moment exactly. She lifted her hand, small and certain, and waved. Behind me, the dining room murmured, a fork, a laugh, the low tide of talk. I turned from the door and went back to the work, which is to say, back to the breathing. The next morning, the postcards came back like birds. One was addressed in my mother's careful hand, the way she writes when she doesn't trust the pen or the moment not to run away from her. Your Aunt Noreen, remember her, told me to tell you she loved the pear salad and the way the room felt kind. She used the word kind. Love, Mom. There was no flourish, no postscript about Sundays, just that word sitting in the center like a candle. I put it on the corkboard above my desk next to May's room to exhale card, and for a long minute let the two phrases talk to each other. Work didn't pause for tenderness. The morning rush of emails arrived, a river that had learned my habits and obeyed none of them. Harbor Light Books needed help reconciling a weekend sale with Square 1 and Square 2. Javi's internet hiccuped and printed 50 labels for one order. He sent a photo of the pile like a ransom note and wrote, "Talk me down." Lydia wanted to know if the thank you emails could pull from the weather so a rainy Tuesday message might begin. "Stay dry. We saved something warm for you." May wrote back, yes, with a heart she almost never used, and Omar disappeared into code like someone diving with full lungs. Around noon, Tom stopped by with paper cups of clam chowder from the diner down the block and a gossip item he pretended wasn't. "Your folks enjoyed the room," he said, passing me a spoon. "Your dad asked the bartender if the knives had been sharpened differently. That's how you know an old man approves. He inquires about maintenance." "He noticed the knives," I said, surprised by how proud that made me. "He noticed the care," Tom said. "Knives are a proxy." In the afternoon, a city arts nonprofit called about hosting an awards luncheon at Harrington's, something we'd never done because no one had thought to ask. "Can your private room handle a lectern and a screen?" the woman asked. "We want speakers to feel like they are in a place that respects the words." I told her we could. After I hung up, I walked to the back room and stood where the lectern would go, imagining names said aloud and clapped for, applause descending like confetti without the mess. At closing, Janine handed me the night's stack of postcards. Some were silly, best fries in a place that pretends it's too fancy for fries, and some were quiet. I wore my mother's brooch for the first time since she died. Thank you for room to cry a little. One was written in block letters and signed E, just an initial, the way some people sign because names feel like secrets. She looked at me like we were just starting, not like we were almost finished. It read, I didn't know what story that sentence belonged to. I didn't need to. The room had done its job. I didn't expect my family to call. They did, my father first. "I liked the service," he said, a man evaluating a thing by the parts he can name. "The pacing. You can tell when a place knows its own rhythm." "Thank you," I said, not explaining that rhythm had been a line item, a whiteboard, an argument, 100 footnotes of timing and mercy. He cleared his throat. "Your mother says we should go again sometime. You know, bring Aunt Noreen. She likes to see and be seen." "Any time," I said. "Tell me when." A day later, Evan texted, "You got a tab there." I wrote back something like that. He sent a winking emoji I ignored. 2 dots appeared and disappeared, the modern way to watch someone decide how honest to be. Then, "You seem good, Ratch, like you're standing different." I stared at the screen, not for the compliment but for the effort. "Thanks," I typed. "Feels like I found a room that breathes back." He hearted it, and a minute later, "Proud of you." I took a screenshot and slid it into the proof folder where relief lives. At North Star, the yes column grew. A shop in Boise came online and sent us a photo of a bulletin board with our analytics graph pinned beside a flyer for a pie bake-off. "We measure new things now," the owner wrote. "Time saved. Smiles counted." May printed that one and taped it by Omar's monitor. "Metrics I will defend with my life," she said. Harrington settled around us like a coat tailored a little tighter than you ordered, and then, after a week, just right. The second runner knew the pass by sound. Marco learned the shift in heat. when the oven door wanted to misbehave. The hostess developed a superpower for recognizing people who needed a corner and people who needed to be seen in the middle. The dishwashers, bless them, hummed through 7 o'clock without turning traitor. There were hiccups. A Tuesday lunch no-showed half its reservations. We sent the staff home early with cartons of soup and made a note to court a business we'd ignored. People who celebrate on weekdays because weekends are for survival. A new server cried in the alley after a table snapped at her for bringing the wrong wine. Janine stepped out, handed her a tissue, and said, "This job, honey, is 90% not taking things personally and 10% knowing when to take them very personally. Tonight's the first one." Alina visited once at opening. She stood in the doorway like a woman checking in on a child she'd raised and released. "The light is better," she said, noticing the bulbs we'd swapped for warmer color, the way evening draped the room now instead of flattening it. "Don't ever let it be too bright. People tell the truth in right light." At the bar, she ordered tea and watched us move for a few minutes with the satisfied melancholy of someone recognizing a song they taught and no longer need to sing. On her way out, she touched the brass rail and whispered, maybe to the room, maybe to me, "Steward." January arrived, and with it a newsletter from the city's small business office featuring North Star and Harrington's in the same paragraph, a coincidence that made me laugh. A local software platform helps independent shops breathe, the write-up read, and a legacy restaurant finds modern grace. I showed May. She underlined grace and said, "We should steal that, not the word, the posture." We planned a night that felt like a promise kept. An author dinner with Lydia in conversation with a poet about ordinary kindness, tickets that included a signed book, and a bowl of soup that didn't change. We priced it so a teacher could come. Javi arrived early and set books like little boats by each place setting. Tom sat where the host could see him and count beats without trying. My mother bought 2 tickets and brought Aunt Noreen, who wore a brooch the size of a memory, and told the poet afterward that one line would live in her purse from now on. The night was quiet in the way good rooms are quiet, people listening, forks pausing halfway to mouths when words landed, laughter arriving on time. I saw my father wipe at his eye once and pretend it was a sneeze. When the check arrived, I touched his hand again. "It's on us," I said, the plural honest this time. He searched my face for a second, old maps, new roads, and then let go like a man laying a burden down gently, not because he's weak, but because he trusts the ground. After they left, Evan lingered by the host stand. "Level with me," he said, halfway to a grin, halfway to wonder. "What's going on here? You know the server knows you, you walk like you own the place." I let the moment breathe. "I walk like I belong," I said. He squinted, doing lawyer math. "Is there a difference?" "Yes," I said, "but sometimes they rhyme." He laughed and shook his head. "You always were better with words." He tucked his hands in his coat pockets and looked around like a tourist and a local at once. "If you ever need, I don't know, a contract looked over, pro bono," he added quickly, as if money might ruin the offering. "I'm your guy." I told him I knew, I meant it. Days slipped forward with the honest work of feeding a city. We hosted the arts luncheon and watched a young playwright cry when an older one shook her hand too long and said, "Keep going." We printed a gift card for a woman who wrote, "He's sober 30 days, this is his stake." We added a small note to the bottom of the menu, "If you're celebrating something you can't name, we're honored to hold it with you," and watched a few people touch the words with 2 fingers the way my mother had touched the postcard. At North Star, Omar built a quiet integration that let Harrington's calendar talk to our system in a way that would one day matter more than anyone guessed. May insisted the confirmation emails for private events begin. "We're glad it's you," because sometimes the difference between a room and a transaction is the sentence that arrives first. On a Wednesday, The banker in the cardigan stopped in for lunch, sat at the bar, and read a paperback while eating a grilled cheese that Marco makes for exactly no one, but agreed to make for her because she'd carried us when a bigger bank would have asked for a louder story. She paid in cash and left without introducing herself. Janine found the receipt, read the name, and put it under the magnet labeled Angels on the walk-in door. At home, my plant leaned wherever I put it, faithful and green. I rotated it toward the winter light and thought about my mother's postcard again, kind, and about the math my father had started to trust that wasn't about checks anymore. The old arithmetic, seats counted, slices measured, praise rationed, hadn't vanished. It had been replaced by something softer, truer, and harder to brag about. Breath in, breath out, do the work, make room. Evan texted late. Hey, Mom asked if they should book Harrington's for their anniversary in March. Said she wants the small room with the window. Is that hard to get? I typed back, we'll take care of them. He replied, we, and added a little detective emoji. I let it sit. Some reveals are not confetti, they're timing. The city rained. The room glowed. The postcards left and returned, each one a little conveyor belt of feeling. And somewhere between the soup we didn't change and the ladle we did, the past loosened its grip enough for the future to get a hand in. When the email arrived from Alina, press has asked about a story on Harrington's transition. I've told them stewardship is the headline. Would you like to be named? I read it twice. A younger version of me would have sprinted toward the marquee. The version who had built oxygen thought about ladders and lungs. Name me, I wrote back, but let the room speak first. The story ran on a Thursday, the kind of gray that makes headlines look heavier. The paper called it a handoff, pictured Alina in front of the bar that had learned the curve of her palm, and me beside her, smaller in the frame as if I were still easing myself into it. The headline used her word, stewardship. The subhead named me, Rachel Morgan, owner of North Star, assumes ownership of Harrington's, and then moved on to talk about rooms and breath and what a restaurant owes a city. I read it once at the host stand, once at the corner of the bar where Tom keeps his stool, and once alone in the office, the door half closed so I could still hear the dining room. May snapped a photo of the page and sent it to Omar with a single star emoji. He replied with 3 more. Lydia texted a string of exclamation points followed by, you kept the soup. Javi wrote, look at you, boss of linen, and then, because he can't help himself, I want fries at my wedding. At noon, my mother called. She didn't say hello. You're in the paper, she said, which is our family's way of saying I saw you without letting too much feeling spill. I am, I said. There was a pause, the kind that stretches between old maps and new roads. Harrington's, she said finally, tasting the word. You own Harrington's. I do. Another pause, smaller. We should have known, she said, and I almost apologized for not telling her earlier, then didn't. I'm proud, she added, the word slipping out before she could vet it. Your father is too, he said. Of course she did it quietly. I laughed, grateful for a sentence that let the room back into our call. Quiet until it wasn't, I said. We didn't make a speech out of it. We talked about Aunt Noreen's brooch, about a neighbor's hip, about whether the paper's photographer had been kind. But the ground had shifted a few inches in the direction I'd been building toward, and I could feel it under both our feet. The phone buzzed all afternoon, old classmates, a librarian who once let me keep a book late, the credit union banker in the cardigan who wrote, "You're a good bet." Evan texted a screenshot of the article with no words, and then, a minute later, "Damn, Ratch." Then, "Dinner on you forever," and a winking face to soften a habit he didn't know how to break. We rerouted attention the only way I know how, by doing the work in front of us. A last-minute private event needed a seating chart that wouldn't make strangers sit knee to knee. The bar printer hiccuped and Omar coaxed it back. Janine taught a new server how to clear a table without making the night feel over. Marco sent me a spoon to taste a sauce that had decided to be too proud. "Let it sit with itself," he said. We did. The city's arts luncheon came off like a poem, speeches that didn't waste breath, hands that clapped for the right things. The nonprofit director hugged me in the doorway and said, "We needed a room that believed words mattered before we got here." I told her the room had been practicing for years. Near closing, Alina stepped in as if the camera had called her name again. She stood at the end of the bar and watched the last tables finish in the slow way goodnights finish. "I'm glad they used stewardship," she said. "Me too." She nodded toward the dining room. "You didn't make the mistake new owners make." "What's that?" Being the most interesting thing in the room. I walked her to the door and we stood under the chandelier that turns everyone into a little more of their best self. She touched the brass rail. "You hear it breathing?" she asked. "I do." "Good," she said and left like a whisper. March edged closer, carrying my parents' anniversary with it like a candle you protect with cupped hands. My mother called to ask about the room with the window, her voice careful, as if there were a right answer she didn't want to miss. "We'll take care of you," I said, and she exhaled in a way that reached across the line and filled the space around me. We planned simply. Flowers that didn't intrude, a playlist that remembered their first decade without turning the night into a museum. A menu that told the truth about who they are now. Less salt, more savor. May wrote a confirmation email that began, "We're glad it's you." And then, because she knows my mother, added a PS about parking that's never as clear as maps pretend. A week before the dinner, a test came the way tests always do, unannounced on a Tuesday. A pipe in the ceiling above the private room decided it had put up with enough winters and chose drama over patience. We closed the room an hour after it reopened. Omar found a plumber by dialing every number the internet would offer, and Tom stood under the drip with a bucket and a look that said, "You're allowed to cuss once." I did. Then we moved the book club to the main floor and offered dessert on the house and asked a couple celebrating a quiet promotion if they'd mind the back corner with the fairy lights. "We like fairy lights," they said, and I added fairy lights to the part of my brain that files away grace. We repaired what needed repairing. We called the families on the calendar and told them the truth in the clear voice trust requires. The room would be ready, and if it wasn't, we would make something better than a substitute. People forgave what you didn't try to hide. The plumber patched, the paint dried, and I spent an afternoon sitting in the room while nobody was in it, listening to whether it had forgiven us. It had. On the day of my parents' anniversary, I wore a dress that didn't demand attention and told the staff to pretend the owner was a woman who had the night off. Janine handled the table. May stood in the hall during seating like a stage manager, making sure the first beat landed. Omar hovered where the printer used to misbehave, hand on the cord like a saint protecting an altar. Tom took his stool and counted second nature. My parents arrived early. My mother wore a blue she calls true, my father a tie I hadn't seen in years. Evan came with flowers and a softness that didn't require his jokes to arrive first. "Happy anniversary," I said, and handed my mother a postcard with the return address already stamped. "For later," I said. "Tell someone you loved tonight." She smiled the way she smiles in photographs she doesn't see coming. "I already know what I'll write," she said, and tucked it into her purse with the care of a woman storing a small kindness for a long winter. They sat. The room did what rooms do when they've been taught to breathe. It made itself smaller where intimacy needed it and bigger where pride did. The soup didn't change. The ladle did. Marco sent out a salad that remembered their early tastes and respected their tonight. When the main came, my father cut and closed his eyes the way he had at our first dinner back. But this time he reached for my hand across the table and squeezed once, not to claim or steady, just to share. Halfway through, the band, just a trio we use on weekends, slipped into a song my parents used to dance to in the kitchen when rent was late, and hope was ahead of them anyway. My mother's hand went to her throat. She didn't cry. She looked at my father like they were starting again. Later, she would write that exact line on the postcard. I would read it, alone in the office with the door ajar, and have to sit down. Eleanor stopped by, not for fanfare, but because she had promised herself she would witness a crowded room breathing under someone else's watch. She caught my eye from the doorway. I crossed to her as Janine set down my parents' dessert with Happy 40th lettered in chocolate so fine it looked like a whisper. "You did it," Eleanor said. "You made it new without making it young." "Rooms should have birthdays," I said, "not rebirths." She laughed the soft laugh of someone whose bones agree. Then she did a thing I didn't expect. She walked to my parents' table, touched my mother's shoulder the way women ask permission, and said, "Congratulations." My mother stood as if a mayor had arrived. "We love it here," she said. "Always have." Eleanor nodded toward me. "She loves it too," she said, "in the way owners love things by worrying them into goodness." My father looked at me like the map had finally updated. "Owner," he repeated, not testing it now, just trying it on. It fit. The night closed itself gently. Coats appeared. The staff moved with that exhausted joy that means the machine and the people had kept pace with each other. My parents lingered in the doorway the way they always do, as if trying to memorize something you can't keep by memorizing. My mother took my hand. "You built this," she said, and the sentence held the soup and the software and the breath. "We see it now." "We didn't know how to see it before," my father added, because honesty was his gift when he could find it. "I'm sorry for that. I told them what I have learned to tell myself. We all learn late. It still counts." They left with the postcard in her purse and the song in their bones. Evan hung back again, hands in his pockets, the way men do when they want to be useful and haven't found the door. "You made a room where they could be their best," he said. "I forget that's a thing you can build." "You build it all the time," I said, "just with different materials." He half smiled. "Maybe." He looked around one more time. "If anyone messes with you, tell me," he said, and I laughed because it was the blunt poetry of a brother who needed to say it. "Okay," I said, "you'll be my last call." After the door swung shut and the night took them, I stood under the chandelier and let the room finish breathing without me. Janine appeared at my elbow. "You're not going to cry, are you?" she said, not unkindly. "Not here," I said. "Maybe at the postcards." She chuckled. "Good, we're out of tissues. Omar used them on the printer." I turned off the lights one bank at a time, watched the room fall into the kind of dark that means nothing is broken and everything gets to rest. In the office, I pulled open the drawer where we keep the mail and found my mother's postcard at the top, as if the world had wanted me to read it before sleep. We looked at each other like we were starting again. "Thank you for a room that let us." "Love, Mom." I pinned it next to Room to Exhale and the article clipping and the Boise Shops smile graph. Then I sat in the quiet and let the late lesson count. Outside, rain traced the windows the way it does when a city is telling you it's on your side. The next morning, the email arrived from a foundation whose name I'd only ever read in other people's thanks. "We fund places that hold communities together," it said. "We'd like to talk." The email from the foundation stayed unread until the next morning, waiting like a book you don't open until you finish the chapter before it. I knew it was important, maybe even a door to something larger, but for that one night, it was enough to have built a room where my parents could look at each other like it was the first time. The work didn't end there. Work never does. Harrington's needed steady hands, North Star kept growing, and the postcards kept traveling out and back like reminders that kindness has a round trip. But something in me had settled. I wasn't the girl pressing her face to the glass anymore. I wasn't the daughter waiting for a chair. I had built the table, and more than that, I had made sure there was room at it for others. If I've learned anything, it's this. Family doesn't always look the way we're told it should. Sometimes it takes the shape of people who show up after hours to roll silverware, or a mentor with coffee-stained spoons, or a brother who doesn't have the words but tries anyway. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, even the people who once overlooked you will find their way back to the table you made. So maybe that's the heart of it. The past doesn't vanish, but it can loosen its grip. The future doesn't appear, but it can be built. Slowly, stubbornly, kindly, one plate, one seat, one breath at a time. And if you've ever felt left out, erased, or unseen, I hope this story reminds you, you are not defined by the chairs you weren't offered. You can build your own table. And when you do, let it be big enough for others, even the ones who once turned away. Thank you for staying with me through this story. May you and your loved ones find health, peace, and joy in the rooms you share. May your family, by blood, by choice, or by kindness, always have space for happiness. And if this story touched you, I invite you to stay with us here. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of love, resilience, and the tables we build together.